We humans are particularly interested in our own intelligence, and we take great pride in it as well. I mean, we literally named ourselves Homo sapiens, which literally means wise man. But this mainly derives from the reality that our human intelligence is simply aware enough to name itself as intelligent. So if we step out of our human hubris, we can define intelligence as many other definitions. If we were to define intelligence in one way, we can think of intelligence instead as the ability to act rationally, which is making decisions that are aligned with goals even in uncertainty. Now, under that definition of intelligence, that can encapsulate a lot of different things that include machines, animals, ecosystems, and even algorithms. All of what I've mentioned can then be classified as participants of intelligence. So, intelligence was never a human domain to begin with. It wasn't ever exclusively ours. And that concept and realization is exactly what builds the foundations and the question of what is artificial intelligence. If you don't live under a rock and you also have access to the internet and some other surrounding people in your life, you probably will nonstop hear about AI because of things like ChatGPT and other LLMs just taking the world by storm. I mean, we all know what it's doing to our financial markets. We all know what it's doing to boomers' brains. We know what it does to even each other's love lives and stuff. I mean, it's kind of crazy where the discourse of AI is going at this point. I wanted to remind y'all that before AI looked like this, which is Twitter's girlfriend LLM that parasocial gooners are gonna get off to and stuff, in the beginning, it more so looked like this. Yeah. I will be referring a lot to the textbook Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach, the fourth edition of that book, by Stuart Russell and Peter Norvig, amongst other outside sources that I may or may not source, depending on if what I say is just complete slop or not. The purpose of this video and the series of videos that follow is for you guys to interact and corroborate information so that I'm not just completely speaking nonsense and stuff. I would absolutely love some feedback and some discussion on what I lecture about. I do encourage that. Without further ado, let's get into how intelligence was never ours referring to humans alone, and how that basically leads us to the question of what is artificial intelligence? AI as a field is not just concerned about understanding, but also building intelligent entities. In the practical context of how it manifests today, it means building machines that can compute and act effectively and safely in a wide variety of novel situations. AI researchers and developers have pursued several different versions of AI depending on how they define intelligence. Defining intelligence itself is a fundamental precursor step on actually building and developing AI. So now let's put more rigor into defining intelligence itself. I have made this political compass-esque graph. I promise you it works relatively well. Each quadrant represents the 4 different definitions of artificial intelligence and, in extension, participants of intelligence as a whole. And so for the rest of this video, I will be referring to participants of intelligence as agents. On the y-axis, we have the scale of expressed intelligence. At the top, we have internal expressions of intelligence, which include things like thought, reasoning. At the bottom, we have external expressions of intelligence, which include things like behaviors alongside actions that are outputted to the environment. On the x-axis, we have a criterion for intelligence. On the left, we have human performance, which is the degree of how human an agent acts. Keep in mind, like I said in the video, our human bias and hubris around our own intelligence has made it such where, well, some valid definitions of intelligence include human likeness. On the right, we have rationality, which is the degree to which an agent acts optimally towards its goals. So now we have the X and Y axis out of the way. Let's go through all the 4 definitions of intelligence and an extension AI based on each of these quadrants. We're going to go in a weird order. It's not going to be really pleasant for your eyes. We're going to start from quadrant 3 and then end in quadrant 4. But we're going to go like that. Just bear with me for this one. The first definition of intelligence, acting humanly. So agents that act like people. This quadrant defines intelligence by behavioral imitation, which is the extent to which an agent's outward actions and responses are indistinguishable from those of a human. In this quadrant and in this definition of intelligence, the focus is not on the reasoning behind the imitation, but rather the observable outputs and performance of that said intelligence, where success in this definition of intelligence is measured by human likeness in interaction and expression. So in essence, this approach of intelligence is centered on achieving intelligent behavior indistinguishable from a human's. In the pursuit of developing agents that fit within this criteria and definition of intelligence, Alan Turing proposed what is now called the Turing test. And for the Turing test, a computer or program passes the Turing test if a human interrogator, after posing it with written questions, cannot distinguish whether the responses from that computer come from either a human or a machine. However, when it comes to this definition of intelligence, a lot of AI developers and researchers put little effort into trying to pass the Turing test because, as I'll get into later, developers and researchers prioritize the study and development of the underlying principles of intelligence. It's kind of like how engineers study aerodynamics to build planes rather than building planes that imitate birds. The next definition of intelligence is thinking humanly. This quadrant of intelligence focuses on the processes and mechanisms of human thought itself. Not about just producing the correct results, but understanding and modeling how humans perceive, reason, and solve problems. So intelligence in this quadrant is defined by its psychological fidelity to human cognition rather than its logical or behavioral outcome. In essence, this quadrant is focused on developing accurate computational models on how humans think. So when researchers and developers of AI are building agents in this defined field of intelligence, the idea is that if a precise theory of the mind is expressed as a computer program and the program's input and output behavior matches human behavior, then there would be evidence that the mechanisms behind that developed agent might be operating in humans itself. An example of a developed agent in this defined quadrant of intelligence was the General Problem Solver, GPS, developed in the 50s by Alan Newell and Herbert A. Simon. It was one of the first computer programs to mimic human problem-solving tendencies. The program was intended to simulate human thought processes rather than solving specific types of problems. Its purpose was to show how humans move from a given situation to a desired goal. That initiative really propelled later developments in cognitive modeling, heuristic searching, and AI planning systems. Third definition of intelligence is the laws of thought approach, aka thinking rationally. So in this quadrant of intelligence, it is defined as the ability to think logically and to reason correctly, basically reaching valid conclusions given the information an agent has. In this definition of intelligence, intelligence is judged by how consistent and accurate the reasoning is, focusing on clear, logical thinking rather than human habits or intuition. In essence, this definition of intelligence is concerned with following provably correct rules to instantiate new knowledge. So, developers and researchers, when they build agents with this definition of intelligence, it aligns with the logicist tradition, which is to build systems on irrefutable reasoning. Computer programs could, theoretically, solve any solvable problem if described in logical notations. A limitation in this definition of intelligence is that rational thought is not enough because it doesn't automatically translate into outputting intelligent behavior. And so a theory, or shall I say, a definition of rational action is also required, which is quite smooth because in the fourth quadrant, in our final definition here, is that theory of rational action. The fourth definition of intelligence is the rational agent approach. Basically, acting rationally. Intelligence is defined through goal-directed action, which is the capacity of an agent to make optimal decisions that maximize success given its knowledge base and environment. Intelligence in this quadrant is not defined by imitation or reasoning, but by rational behavior, rational actions, which means doing the right thing to achieve the best possible outcome it is assigned under uncertainty. This definition of intelligence is the most common when building artificial intelligence, and it is how intelligence is underlyingly defined. So in that regard, we can also create a new definition for an agent. An agent is a participant of intelligence, but also we can say that an agent is an entity that perceives and reacts. And when we think in the context of a rational agent is one that acts so as to achieve the best outcome, or when uncertain, the best expected outcome. In this definition of intelligence, rationality is only concerned with the decisions that are made, the actions, not the thought processes that are behind those actions. This definition of intelligence and the agents that adhere to it are agnostic with regard to the method of thinking. Think of an example of when there's a hot stove. Say you accidentally touch that hot stove. You recoil your hand back, not because you thought about recoiling your hand back, but rather it was a reflexive action without any deliberation. This definition and approach of intelligence is way more robust than this definition of intelligence, of thinking rationally, as inference is just one mechanism of rationality. Also, the development and building of systems and agents within this definition is far more scalable in regards to scientific development and, under our society, and what's most important, capital accumulation, because the standard of rationality is mathematically well-defined and very generalized. All right, so now that we have defined all of the definitions of intelligence, we have some plotted points here on this board, some agents. I will say that there is some subjectivity to where I have placed these agents in this graph that I have created, and any kind of comment or discussion around my placements is heavily encouraged in the comment sections. I would love to hear you guys just completely rip me apart and be like, oh my God, you are so stupid. You have no idea what you're talking about. Let's get started on this. The first agent that I want to talk about, ChatGPT and other LLMs. On the human performance and rationality scale, the x-axis, I put it on the middle right here. It leans towards rationality more than human performance because ChatGPT and LLMs reasons through statistical structure and logic rather than emotions and embodiment like a human. ChatGPT isn't a person. It doesn't have qualia. It doesn't have a body to inhabit, and it doesn't have consciousness. So there is no emotion. There is no perceived experience that it has. It's not a person. Everything that it does is within this statistical structure and logic with a ton of mathematics. What it outputs and what it's trained on is simply just rational linguistic structures. That part of it operating on rational linguistic structures is also the reason why it's not completely on this whole side of rationality. It still mimics human language patterns, and it reflects human semantics and cultural imprints. On the y-axis, so from internal to external expressions of intelligence, I put this one on the top middle of the graph. And this is because LLMs and ChatGPT operate largely internally. They operate in a textual symbolic realm rather than a sensory or embodied space. It doesn't necessarily do anything in the material world. It operates within its own internal structure. However, it's not at the extreme top of internal thought and reasoning because ChatGPT and LLMs are trained on externally produced human text. It reflects the external reality secondhand. Let's go to the next agent that is just adjacent from ChatGPT and LLMs. Humans. So on the x-axis, I put this on the left middle because humans balance reason and emotion. However, humans lean more towards embodiment and intuition within itself rather than operating on purely logical thought. You could say that humans are rational animals, but they're not purely rational agents. A human's intelligence is contextual, emotional, and driven through a innate meaning within the embodiment of oneself. So our conscious experience, our worldviews, the things that we find deep to us, our conscious experience, all play a role in our intelligence rather than being algorithmically consistent. On the y-axis, I put humans at the top middle because humans have the ability to introspect, have internal reflections, imagination. However, it's not all the way on the internal spectrum because we're still tethered to the material realm. Our bodies are shells for our experiences. So in that regard, human cognition is hybrid. We think about the world through ourselves, our bodies. So that's why it's not all the way up into the internal side of things. The next agent that I want to go over is pretty opposite to humans, and that is AlphaGo. So AlphaGo, for context, is an AI program developed by Google's DeepMind Technologies dedicated to playing the board game Go, which is a very highly complex strategic board game that originates from ancient China. Building AlphaGo was a huge undertaking because the game itself has an incredibly large search space, way larger than chess's. There's so many different spaces that can be inhabited in that game. And the game relies heavily on intuition and pattern recognition rather than brute force calculations. One thing about AlphaGo that was incredibly impressive and significantly revealing was that AI could master creative, intuitive, and strategic thinking that was previously thought to only really be a human domain. See, AlphaGo doesn't imitate human intuition. It discovers strategies through just optimizing itself. It doesn't even understand the game Go. All it is programmed to do is to win via using statistical learning and reinforcement-based reward systems, which means that its intelligence is entirely functional and not experiential. It doesn't experience it. It's just purely a function basis. So in that regard, on the x-axis, I put it all the way to the far extreme of rationality. AlphaGo doesn't have any emotion, intuition or self-reference to itself. As I said earlier, it's a very much functional intelligence. It's built upon rule-based goal optimization, which is basically maximizing the probability of winning. It cannot improvise or think creatively, which means that it has no room of irrationality. It cannot bend the rules or redefine its meaning. In the y-axis, I put this at mid-low. Honestly, I think this should probably be like right here. So I don't know why I put it up here, I'll be honest. Just pretend that AlphaGo is like right here. AlphaGo is not embodied. It's not like a person or anything, of course. But it also doesn't have any reasoning or thought capabilities whatsoever. It operates solely in this closed environment, specifically for the game Go, which is an external space, but it is fully defined. And once again, it doesn't possess any mental model. It only has a statistical model of game outcome. There is some internal representation that AlphaGo has, evaluating the state of the game, neural predictions, as it uses neural networks, but by no means is it introspective or self-contained like an LLM. Let's move on to the next agent, which I decided to put dogs. I love dogs a lot. I have a German Shepherd. His name is Ray. He's super, super cute. So I put the dog at mid-left when it comes to the x-axis. You might be like, what do you mean that dogs are like humans? That's weird. But actually, think of it like this. There's a lot of cognitive overlap that dogs have with humans. It inhibits social learning, memory, and symbolic associations with things. Yet, it doesn't operate with any abstract reasoning. Dogs don't have abstract reasoning capabilities. Therefore, they primarily operate through instinct, which is a very much external expression of intelligence. Because of that, a dog's understanding of things is situational, but not conceptual. It feels and responds rather than analyzes and plans. Albeit, this is like what we know of dogs. Maybe we don't give them as much as credit. I know I was mentioning earlier when it comes to the x-axis, but now thinking about the x-axis and the y-axis are relatively similar in certain ways, as I'll get into in this example, because on the y-axis, I put the dog at a quite low level towards the bottom external expression of intelligence. Dog's awareness is grounded situationally and in its immediate environment. When there is symbolic meaning that dogs attach to things, it's not necessarily out of an abstract reasoning. It's usually a classically conditioned attunement. And dogs don't really introspect. They learn and their intelligence emerges through interactions. So I didn't put it all the way at the bottom because you never know. Maybe dogs do have a little thing going inside their head. Like, I'd like to think that. So I'm going to put it a little bit up here. Next agent that we're going to analyze is a system level agent. It's made up of multiple participants of intelligence, both natural and artificial. That being corporations and financial markets. In the x-axis regard, I put this right dead in the middle. Corporations and financial markets embody rational processes like cost-benefit analysis, optimization, profit maximization. However, what makes up this system-level agent are mostly humans. Humans in companies, humans that participate in financial markets. Humans' emotions, politics, bias, all contribute towards higher levels of irrationality within this system-level agent. You could say that corporations and financial markets represent a impure form of rationality. It operates on logic without awareness, with that logic being applied by multiple humans. On the y-axis, I put corporations and financial markets at the bottom middle, so leaning, of course, towards the external expressions of intelligence. And this is because the intelligence that corporations and financial markets showcase are in this external world. They're expressed through behavior. This includes things like production of commodities, the trading of commodities, the pricing of commodities. However, corporations and financial markets are not conscious. They're not living beings whatsoever. They only really operate on external feedback loops existing in the material world, things such as supply and demand, profits and losses. However, there is a little bit of this thinking involved in corporations and financial markets that emerge from the aggregate behavior of the participants in the system, not necessarily an inner model or self. I think we went over everything about what is AI. This video really was to start out thinking about what intelligence truly is, because like I said earlier, it is a fundamental precursor on actually building these artificial intelligence systems. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's anything that I said correct or I said maybe incorrectly, correct me in the comments or add some thoughts into the comments as well. I would love a good discussion about this. So thank you guys for watching once again. And I'm very excited for what comes next. I know I changed my YouTube channel name again, but it doesn't matter. So I appreciate you guys for sticking all the way through, and thanks for watching the video.